we should give some props to the teams that did advance out of Group D and the ones that everyone expected to advance out of Group D. Really top Esports and DRX out of their respective three games. Tyler, anything surprise you? Anything dissuade you or impress you as they move on to the quarters?
Obviously, both teams had falters today. I mean, Top Esports versus FlyQuest, and we'll get into that a bit later with the FlyQuest segment. A bit of a funky draft that went sideways for them there. They bounced back in the DRX series in a war of attrition, Arda. And a war of attrition, the latest first blood in World Championship history, a 0-0 deadlock for, I believe, 23 minutes or so before finally a DRX gets a bit too cute to save their mid lane tower. They stick around way too long. Everything's blown off them. They have no ultimates, and they get caught by a 3K shockwave from Knight to kind of turn the tides, and TS didn't let up from there. But overall, the two best teams from this group did advance. I do wish we saw a bit more of the FlyQuest we saw today with Ignore and Blitzcrank, one of his favorite champions. We saw all the way back in 2017 in China when his Blitzcrank pick almost got Misfits to the top 4 of Worlds. I would have loved to see him bust it out a bit sooner before they were actually eliminated. But I think overall, both teams should be happy with the results. I think TES, I don't think we've seen the best of TES. I think, obviously, we'll get into this more later when we get to the actual playoff segment of previewing, who they're facing off with. But I don't know about TES in this meta. TES is a team that when I was watching them in China and doing prep for the World Championship and talking to LPL experts, Emily Rand, and some of the casters over there, their main thing is TES is at their best when Karsa is enabling their laners, when it's Knight with the ball in his hands, when it's 369 with the ball in his hands, when it's the bot lane, Jackie Love carrying the game. This meta is a lot more about the laners enabling the jungler. It's the jungler a lot of times who is the sole focus point, the guy getting the kills, the guy carrying the game. And it's not like Karsa can't carry the game. Karsa is an adept carry jungler. He can play these champions well, but I don't think that is his strongest suit. I think he's more intelligent than he is brawn. He is a player that helps his laners carry, and I think this meta where he is the sole one of these sole players playing that hard carry role, and you have Knight play more supportively, I think that's a bit awkward TES, where I really would want to see, Knight being the hard carry and Karsa enabling him, it being a bit of a backwards, kind of situation. I think TES doesn't look as strong as I saw them in the regular season in the LPL. And I do think they have a bit of weaknesses in that, Karsa having the carry role that a team like Fnatic, who they've played in the playoffs, might be able to exploit, but we'll get into that a bit later. And I think for DRX, Piosik, your boy Piosik Arda, he had an excellent group stage, one of the best junglers in the tournament. Even in defeat, his Kindred is still a sight to behold. Doran was a lot better than I expected. Deft and Kyria getting back into the form after having a bit of a slump to end the 2020 regular season in Korea. But it's a very similar situation to TES where Chovy on the Galio. I don't want to see Chovy on the Galio. I want to see Chovy actually carrying a game. I want him to be not just a side piece, but the main piece. And that is my question with DRX and TES is these two teams with possibly the two best players in the world, both, superstar mid laners, they are more so relying on their junglers to carry while the mid laners are enabling them. And I don't think we're seeing the top DRX or the top TES because their roles are kind of switched at the moment. So both teams should be proud of what they did. It's going to be interesting to see how far they can go in the bracket stage, especially if this meta continues to hold, because I'd like to see, there's always a chance of a meta flip in the next, few days where teams have off. We might see different picks come out. But I want to see, even in a meta where, Piosik is doing he's doing great carrying, I want to see Chovy on a pick where he can win lane and he can influence by his own mean instead of having to play Galio. And we've seen a lot of Galio games this tournament so far that have not worked out.
So we will talk about this near the end of the show, but just to catch everybody up in case you hadn't heard, Top Esports versus Fnatic, Suning versus JD Gaming, Gen G versus G2, and Damwon versus DRX. Those are your quarterfinals. We're going to hold our predictions until we get to the end of the show. One thing I do want to mention here before we move on is we're obviously going to talk about the FlyQuest victory over Top Esports from the FlyQuest point of view a little bit later on. But correct me if I'm wrong, Tyler. Looking at it from the Top Esports point of view, I'm not concerned. If I'm Top Esports, okay, FlyQuest beat us. But, like, I don't think, like, if you play that game 100 times, Top Esports wins, what, 90, 95 times, maybe?
With that draft?
Not draft. No. I'm saying the whole thing. The draft is not in their favor. I'm saying if they played the entire thing, not the draft 100 times. I mean the entire game, including a redraft.
Yes.
What I do think is, I don't think it's concerning. I think it looks great for FlyQuest, for Airport FlyQuest. I should specify there. But I'm not as concerned. Like, I'm not suddenly not saying that TES aren't the favorites going into the playoffs. Like, I see it as a stumble, sure, but not a massive one. Like, oh boy, there's cracks in the armor now. There's a little concern here with TES. Maybe we shouldn't make them the favorites anymore. Like, I'm not thinking like that due to this loss. Looking at it from the Top Esports side of things. What do you think?
No, I agree with you. I think there is another gear to still be, propped up. There's another gear to be had with TES. I don't think we've seen them at 100%. I think we saw a bit more of it against DRX, where they played a much safer game, and we saw them kind of just flip that switch with, the Oriana Ultimate that kind of just turned the game sideways for DRX, and TS kind of led from there. I'm still kind of concerned about, having Knight be a side character more than the main character, Karsa being the main carry, because I don't know if Karsa, when we look at, the junglers left in the tournament, and you have SOFM, that name always gets me. Can I just call him, Sophom? It's so much easier.
Style of me.
Great abbreviation. But, you look at, Style of Me, you look at Selfmade, you look at even Piosik, who's popping off by himself. You have Canyon, who might be the best jungler in the world. Kanavi, another guy who said he could be another jungler in the world. Karsa is a guy who is smart, he's intelligent, he's brainy, he knows how to, he's excellent jungle pathing, as Emily Rand, our colleague, loves to bring up on multiple times when you bring up Karsa. I don't know if he can be that punch, that the core of, the core carry of a team that wins the world championship with so many killer junglers still left. And he might prove me wrong. He probably will prove me wrong. But I do think for TES to win, Knight can't be a side character. He has to have a bigger role in their games coming up. And when you look at the Fnatic matchup, and we'll dive into a bit more earlier, like him versus Nemesis. Nemesis has had a really good tournament, and he's great at enabling self-made, and that's why I think there's maybe a possibility of Fnatic upset here. But if Knight gets his way and they play more through Knight, I really do see, like, TS is unstoppable if they can have their lane set up and Karsa is enabling them. So even backwards, even with Karsa being the carry and the laners playing through him, they still got the number one place and only lost to FlyQuest in a wonky draft that if they probably pick a bit more smarter, a bit more patiently, they probably win that too. So there's not a lot to really harp on when it comes to Top Esports. They're still one of the favorites to win the world championship. I still think it's them, G2, Damwon, and JD Gaming for me. I think one of those four teams will lift the Summers Cup.
And all of them have moved on, and we will see them in the quarterfinals. 83% of you, by the way, predicted that Top Esports would win Group D. Good for you. Golf clap. Well done.
Wow, what a limb there. Got on a limb.
You did it. The 0.2% that picked FlyQuest, though, I'm just kidding. I actually don't know if that's a stat. ESPN.com/League of Legends Predictor. It's totally free to join and play along. You can invite your friends, create custom groups. Also, if you have the ESPN Fantasy app, you can click on the trophy and play along as well. It will pick up again as we get into the quarterfinals, so keep checking back to make your picks. Don't let your picks go away because they do lock in after a certain time. I made that mistake, which is why I was in the thousands for a while.